It's 1:05 and we are going to be starting now. And like I said earlier, my name is Ikeoluwa Potesi and I'll be your moderator for today. And our webinar of today is on privacy risk management with ISO IEC 27701. And I've seen all your reasons for joining, and trust me, you will not regret taking our time to join today's webinar. Now, the reason why we are having today's webinar is to provide participants with a comprehensive understanding of privacy risk management within the framework of ISO IEC 27701. With the increasing focus on data privacy and the evolving regulatory landscape, organizations must effectively manage privacy risk to safeguard the personal information they handle. So ISO IEC 27701 offers valuable guidance for establishing a robust privacy information management system and integrating privacy risk practices into organizational processes. So we are the right place today to gain more insight. And we'll be focusing on understanding privacy risk management, the overview of ISO 27701, integrating privacy risk management into PIMS, risk assessment methodologies, mitigation strategies and control, continuous improvement. So guys, you see, it promises to be packed and knowledge packed. So today we should just come with our pen and papers ready to write, okay? So I'm going to be introducing our speaker, our guest speaker for today. He is no other than Mr. Kingsley Duru, who is an experienced information security manager at Union Bank of Nigeria, leading governance, risk, and compliance efforts. With over 20 years of experience, Kingsley has expertise in various domains, including cybersecurity, data privacy, audit, and risk management. He holds multiple security certifications, including ISO IEC 27701 lead implementer, ISO IEC 27001 lead implementer and lead auditor, and PCI internal security assessor. Kingsley's knowledge is derived from a combination of study, experience, and practical application, enabling him to effectively develop teams and implement security standards. In the webinar, Kingsley will share insights and practical steps for implementing security standards based on his extensive experience and expertise. Guys, let's welcome our guest speaker for today. You can do so by waving your hands or, dropping some emojis in the chat box. Let's appreciate him. Thank you very, very much, sir, for taking that time to honor our invitation to come share out of your well of knowledge with us. Thank
you very much.
Yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the participants. Thank you for the coordinator. It's a privilege to be with you this afternoon. And we are talking about privacy, everywhere privacy. But before privacy, we need to look at also data, because from data, that's where you begin to look at what is privacy. So this webinar, we're going to make it very interactive. It's going to be something that is not more theory. Yes, theory, you can read your books and pass your exams. But I want you to begin to internalize, most of the things we are going to say here. Look at it from the practical perspective. Let's begin to understand, what is happening, because we say that data currency these days. That's what, one of the buzzing words, data currency. So we need to begin to look at what is even data. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can start. I learned that I just have 1 hour. I hope that we'll be able to. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. Can somebody confirm?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen, sir.
All right, thank you. So I was given to speak on privacy risk management with ISO 27001. And before we get to risk and privacy, we need to have at least an overview of what data protection is all about. looking at from the perspective of what data and information. So I've gotten my profile, we don't need to. So the overview of data protection. So I want to start to say, first of all, data protection. In whose interest? We are, every time we talk about data, first of all, what is data? Data, can be defined as anything, symbols, characters, codes, those things, that's what, we can say that are data. But when data, makes sense, it becomes information. So that's the difference between data and information. So most times we use those words interchangeably. So data means, when you see numbers, figures, characters, codes, symbols, that's data. Then when that data is arranged in a way to make meaning, we call it information. So I want you to have that at the back of your mind as a basis for this training today. So understanding data and information. So saying here, data protection in whose interest? If you look at the slide, I have three, jurisdictions, where data, is critical. Data is important because these days, everything is about data. When you look at all over the world, the greatest companies of the world, the most valuable companies of the world are companies that are dealing on data. Today, when you talk about which company is the most valuable company in the world, before it was Apple, but as today it is Microsoft. And what made Microsoft today to become the most valuable company in the world is data. That's the only thing. That's what. So when you look at the biggest companies of the world of today, talk about Meta, talk about Google, talk about even Twitter, talk about all the biggest companies of the world are companies that are dealing on data. They are companies, their main, business is data, either data utilization, data analytics, or using big data. So unlike in the previous, dispensations where, when you want to talk about global companies, valuable companies, your mind will go to oil and gas, your mind will go to manufacturing, motor manufacturing. That has changed. And why is it so? So that's why the importance of this, our training, because data is a critical thing. Data is a currency. So everybody is looking at data. In fact, people say that data is the new oil, which means that it's very important. You can't live without data. Data is life. In fact, there are some people that use that as their payoff line. One of the telecom, they say data is life, and we know that. So data is life. There's nothing you can think about in this world without talking about data. And that's why it's very important. So we're saying here data in whose interest? When you look at those three jurisdictions, first of all, you see Europe. You see, in Europe, every data subject, these are some of the, words we are going to hear in this training. Data subject, personal identifiable information. So in Europe, we said that privacy and dignity is the king. So here in Europe, data subject, that is the natural person, the person that owns the data, is the king. And that's why when you look at in Europe, what is happening in Europe today, if you are a company operating in Europe and you don't, manage the data of your data subject or preserve or protect the data of your data subject, you run into so many problems. And that's why many companies have run into so many problems. Meta last year was, fine, close to 1.2, billion pounds. Or that Google has done most of those companies because they were not able to do what? Preserve or have privacy of the data of Europeans. So in Europe, the most important thing is what? The privacy of what? The data subject. Why in US? Because in US is a democratic environment. US is more business. So in US, business is the king. They use data for business. That's what, in US is not more important with privacy. They are not really interested in more, in privacy. What they are interested in using data for what? Business. And that's why when you look at most of those companies I've mentioned, they are US companies. Mostly the biggest companies of the world, because they are dealing on data, they see data, for business. They use data for business. They use data to, enhance life. So in US, what is driving data or data in US is what? The economy. And that's what we call the digital economy. And that's why most of the valuable companies of the world, who are the biggest companies of the world today, US, because they are dealing on data. While in places like China, In China, government is the king. Government controls data. Government controls your data. You don't have, control over your data. So in China, is security and control. That's what they're interested in. They want to secure your country. They don't want people, there is nothing like a democracy or fundamental human rights. Government controls you. Why, I put Nigeria at the center. If you look at our Nigeria green and white, so when you look at Nigeria, where are we today? Where are we playing? You will see that, yes, Nigeria will bring the three into focus. Yes, in Nigeria, privacy is a concern. And that's why if you look at what the Federal Consumer Protection, Commission is doing, going after the loan sharks, those who are, they will just send you an email that somebody took loan on your behalf. That is privacy. They are invading people's privacy. No consent. So that's part of Nigeria, focus. Also, Nigeria, we are using data for what? For business. Our financial services, fintechs are emerging every day because Nigeria is seeing data as what? Part of our digital economy. Why also in Nigeria too? Government can come upon you. We have seen it here. It has happened in the past. Nigeria, there was a time Twitter was banned in Nigeria. So, which means in everything. So Nigeria, we are playing from those three strategic, focus. So that's, in a nutshell, where data and how people are using data in various jurisdictions. So I say here, data, privacy, data protection, and information security. What are the relationships? From my diagram here, look at, yes, information security. We said in definition of information security, it said, preserving the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability of information assets. And so, information security, it can be regarded as the father of the two, So when you talk about data privacy and data protection, they are embedded into information security. And that's why this ISO 27001 we are dealing with today is an extension of ISO 27001, which is Information Security Management System. So ISO 27001, which is privacy, information management system, is just an extension of ISO 27001, which means that privacy and data protection is embedded into what? Information security. So we say here that data privacy relates to the legal rights and responsibilities related to ensuring personal information autonomy of a data subject. So here we are talking about the rights, the fundamental rights, the responsibilities of what? Of a data subject. That's what privacy. So how do you protect, how do you guide the fundamental human rights of any data subject or a natural person that you are dealing with his own personal information? Why data protection? In data protection, we are talking about technology. So we are talking about how do I protect this, your data? How do I protect this, your privacy? What kind of technology, what kind of policies, what kind of systems can I put in place in order to ensure that your data is what? Protected? Because data is what? We have said that data is what? Critical. Data is what? Important. Data is the new oil, and I need to protect that data. So when I have data, how do I protect it? And that's what data protection is really about. Looking at all the technologies, looking at all the policies, because that policy also is what? It's a control. So looking at all the controls that should be put in place in order to ensure that data is what? Protected. So I've defined information security, for you. I said that it is preserving the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability of information assets. And, when we talk about confidentiality, that's what we call the CIA. Those, I hope someone of us may not assume. Hello. Can anybody indicate if you have those that you are used to ISO 27001 so that you can give me the perspective or the kind of the audience in this class? So that hello.
We can hear you.
Yes, yes, you can.
Okay. So let's go. So with that, so that will help me to begin on that because we can't do privacy, successfully ISO 27001 without having a little understanding of ISO 27001, which is information security, management system. So here we say the CIA, the triad, that's what we call it, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. And I've defined as information. to you as, data that has meaning, usefulness. So, and they are all assets. And we say asset is anything that has what? Value. Anything that has what? Value is called asset. So, information has value. Information rules the world. Data asset. So anything that has value is called an asset. And the ability to preserve that, protect that, is what we are trying to discuss this afternoon. All right, so I wanted to use this illustration, Tesla. I said, is Tesla an automaker or a data company? It is that there's some questions we need to, Tesla, I don't know. We know Tesla as they produce cars, and also this. When you look at Tesla and their mode of operation, you see that most of the things Tesla, that's why it's a unique company, driving, autonomous vehicles where you don't need a driver, where you don't, and how can they be able to achieve that? How can they achieve that, autonomous vehicles? It's only through data. It's the only thing, Tesla is doing is they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning, in order to do what? Acquire data, acquisition and, aggregation of what? Various data. That's why today the war we are fighting is the war for data acquisition of these big companies. They are looking for how to get what? Data. And that's why when Elon Musk bought Twitter, people were saying, how can somebody pay $44 billion for Twitter? That it's not profitable, it's not. But the guy knew where he was going because he needed access to what? Data. He needed access to data. Yes, initially he invested in OpenAI, and when they had issue, he pulled out of OpenAI. So he needed a source of data. And the easiest way is what? Twitter. So when you tweet, you make some content, you don't know that those data is vain. They are using that data to feed the AIs, which is the large, language models. They use the large language models where they feed, their AIs with all those data. So in Tesla, that's what they do. So Tesla models, they are equipped with sensors. If you look at the second diagram, it's giving us here sensors, cameras. If you enter a Tesla car, that's what you will see. You see sensors, cameras, radars. And those radars are what? What they are doing, and sensors is doing what? Analytics, data analytics, acquiring data, as the driver is driving, as the car is moving from the surrounding, they are gathering data from the entire surrounding. The same thing, from their AI also, they look at from the cloud, the GPS, they use the traffic data, the weather data, everything, object, the maps, so they are acquiring all those data. So what they are using those data is to do what? To enhance, the performance of Tesla cars. That's why they have what they call the Cybertruck. And with time, with the level they are going to level 5. Level 5 means that nobody will assist the car. The car will drive itself perfectly well because data, so they are acquiring the way they are going. If you're on the road, as it's going, if you see the picture, he matches the picture with the picture on the camera, and it will stop because he knows the person. That's what data is all about. But how do we protect all this data? How do we ensure that these data are protected? Because these guys are acquiring this data most times without the consent. Because what is happening in Tesla, though, if you go to Tesla privacy notice, they say we don't use your data, or we don't give your data to third parties. They want to have seen that, yes, those things might not be true. And that's the essence of this training. For us to ensure that, yes, our data are preserved. There is privacy in our data to ensure that the privacy risk is what mitigated. Because in Tesla, what they do is that Elon Musk opened, an insurance company. And what is he doing? So he monetized data, monetized context of those who are using, Tesla cars in order for them to sell insurance. So reduce the insurance premium. And what is he doing? He's giving your data to a third party. He's giving the data of those car owners to third parties who are the insurance, companies, so them to do their insurance risk model. And that is what they are using for data. So all these things are things, that shows that data is critical. Your privacy should be maintained and data should be protected. So we say different types of, privacy. We have what we call the bodily privacy, when people can search you for drugs, psychiatric tests, these are, privacy. People should not invade your privacy. So we have bodily privacy, drug tests, psychological tests, and all those things. We have also territorial privacy, homes and property. And that's why when you go to Europe or like people like London, when you do your CV, they don't, in London, you can't put your address or your age, all those things on your CV. They won't accept that because it's against what privacy. Because if I have your CV, like in Nigeria, they collect CV, because there is no job. They collect your CV, dump it somewhere, and your address is there. It's against privacy because anybody can pick up that CV and the person knows where you are living. It becomes a security issue. It becomes an issue, so of privacy. People invade your privacy. So here, that is what we call territorial what? Privacy. Your home, your property should be what? Secured. Also, we have what we call communication privacy. Post office, your telephone, email. When we do what we call data protection impact and assessment, you know how important your telephone is. You know that your telephone number is critical more than your BVN. It's critical. So these are things. So you don't release these things. You don't, use them anyhow because information are being, gathered from those sources and people can use it against it. Then you have what we call information privacy, and that's the one we're dealing. So information privacy, what others know about you, the kind of transaction you do, behaviors, movement, financial affairs, your health status, especially in the US, where they have the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, so people health is important, especially Europe and the US. You don't divert people's health status. The other day, there was, last 2 weeks that the people, the Prince of Wales, that was complained that have, data, health data were being released, so this is a serious issue. So these are the type of what? Privacy. So we say we all have something to hide, and that is what? Our human dignity. So everybody wants to maintain their dignity. Everybody wants to maintain their human dignity. And that is what we are talking about, privacy. So personal data and some sensitive data, these are some of the, personal data, that's information relating to an identifiable or identified natural person. And that's the person we call data subject. Data subject is a natural person that can be what? Identified. So when you can identify a natural person, you know that yes, you are talking about what? Data subject. And some examples of personal data here, your name, your address, your email, BVN, account number, phone number, photograph, identification number, CCTV footage, these are all data, personal data. These are because that's why, in any environment, if you are entering maybe any office, if you are compliant to NDPR, Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, one of the things is that you must, in your CCTV, there must be, a notice, CCTV notice, telling people that, this premises is what? Is under CCTV, that CCTV. So which means the person needs what? Consent for you to take my pictures or for you to record me. Just like in this, webinar we had, there was a consent, requesting for your consent before, okay, whether we are going to, record this or not. So the same thing, that's one of the, so these are personal data. And before you collect those personal data, you must what? Get the consent of the owner of those data. And we have also what we call the sensitive data. These are data relating to your religious belief, relating to your health status, your race, ethnicity, because these are sensitive issues. So like biometrics, your religious, your even sexual tendencies. Today, not only male and female we have in the world, now they have different, sexual, tendencies. So these are sensitive issues that, don't discuss anyhow. So they are very sensitive. Okay, so the multiple basis for processing your personal data, in GDPR and NDPR, that's Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, and GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation of Europe. It provided lawful basis for processing a personal data. There are 6 lawful bases. In Nigeria, before we had 5 lawful bases. But the new act that was signed in June, 2023, provider has added the 6th one, and that's what we call the legitimate interest. Legitimate interest. So as of today, now we have 6 lawful basis for processing of personal data. And first is the consent. Consent means that yes, before you take my data or my personal information, you must ask for my consent. I must approve. I must tell you to go ahead. If that is not done, then you should not use my data. And that's why we have privacy notice. If you go to most of the websites of companies, you have your privacy notice. And where the privacy notice there is stating, okay, these are our responsibility and this is the duty of the data subject. And one of those things is that before you should obtain my data or use my data, there must be consent. And that's one of the lawful basis, of processing people's, personal information. And the second one is contract. When you enter into a contract is binding, and contract is, where two or three people agree, on certain things. So that's a contract. Like now, if you're in banking, you an account opening form, and there are some requirements there written there. So the moment you have signed, you have entered into contract with that bank. So that's a contract. It's lawful. So based on that, all those information you provided to the bank has what? Because you are giving them what? It is a contract you have signed. So they can be able to process those data because it has been agreed. You have accepted all the conditions, terms and conditions. So it's a contract, and contract is what? Valid. So you cannot repudiate such decision because you have entered into a binding contract. And the third one is legal obligations. At times there are legal obligations, which data controllers or data processors can enter into. Like if today, EFCC is looking for somebody and they request or come to an organization or a bank and ask for information of that person, it is a legal obligation so long as they come with a court order. If the court has ordered that they should release your data, the organization is obliged to do that. The organization is obliged to ensure that those information are released. So nobody can, you cannot, sue that organization because it's based on legal obligation. Then we have what we call public interest. Yes, at times also, somebody can come in by public interest and say, yes, this thing, maybe somebody is doing something, somewhere like, building, construction, that is affecting the environment and that is not in the best interest of the public. Yeah, you can release the information relating to that person because it is in the public interest. We need to protect our environment, we need to protect our people, we need to protect the security. So you can come under public interest and release those data, to anybody that's looking for such information and will not be held liable. So the next one is vital interest. Vital interest also is very important. Vital interest means like, let me give you an scenario. Vital interest means, when somebody is not in a position to give consent, you are not in a position to give consent. At that point, and it is critical that your data, your information, personal identifiable information should be released. And the example is that maybe somebody was coming to work and on the road, he had an accident and he was in a position that he couldn't, say, okay, please call my mother, call my relative, call my acquaintance or something like that. And somebody saw his or her ID card and picked up ID card and saw that, yes, at the back of the ID card, the HR, number is there. And the person called HR. And HR, went and released, okay, who is the next of kin? Okay, the next of kin of this person, they call the next of kin. Hey, somebody had an accident. So that is vital interest. So in a position when the data subject is not in a position to make that viable decision of consent, you can come within what we call vital interest in order to save life, in order to release the personal information of such data subject. And the last one is the one we call the legitimate interest, which I said that in the past it was not NDPR. NDPR did not provide that, that provision. But with the Act, 2023 Data Protection Act of Nigeria signed, it has brought in legitimate interest as one of the bases, for processing personal data. And what is legitimate interest? Legitimate interest means that, yes, there are certain things that an organization of a body that I have, legitimate interest with if it's within the context of the organization. If it's within the context of my business, if it's within the purview of my business, then I have legitimate interest to use those data. Example, if like a bank now, I want to do marketing and my customers, I have their data, I have their information, and I want to sell products to them. Because it is within my business interest, it is within my legitimate interest, I can use their data. I can send, information, adverts to them, telling them about my new product. We start getting consent from them. We start asking for consent. And that is the basis of what? Legitimate interest. So why Nigeria has put it is also for us, we say, when we discuss about the jurisdiction, we're talking about digital economy. It will help what to build business. It will help to grow business, because I don't need to get consent for me to cross-sell, or I don't need to get consent for me to, sell my product to my customers or to those I have their information. So that's the basis of what legitimate interest. The 6 basis for processing of personal data. Any question? Any question? Do I go ahead?
Please go ahead. For me,
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
It's self-explanatory. Just go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, thanks. So privacy information management system, we want to get into that. So ISO 27701. So this is the basis, ISO 27001 2019. It says an international standard for privacy information management system. It specifies requirements and guides establishing and implementing and maintaining and continual improvement of privacy information management system. Just like I said earlier on, it is an extension of ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. ISO 27002 is the controls. In ISO 27001 2013, we have 114 controls and 114 controls. So ISO 27001 is an extension of both ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. So it's an extension. So anything you see in privacy is just an extension. So what we have done is that anywhere there is information security, we change it to information security and privacy. So if you go to that standard, the standard document of PMS, you see that. So anywhere that is information security is changed to information security and privacy. Please note that. So these are the benefits of ISO 27001 2019. It gives transparency, between all the stakeholders. It gives transparency, understanding what privacy is all about, how we can manage privacy, how we can handle privacy. It reduces liability, because when you have full knowledge, you know how to manage privacy, the risk associated with personal data. It helps you to reduce liability. Just like I gave an example, in Europe, most of these companies are facing sanctions on every time, even this year, Meta, they're facing a lot of sanctions. So when you, be able to, introduce this standard and make sure that you comply to this standard, it will help you to reduce your liability. Also, it reduces complexities, by integrating it into what ISO 270. So the moment you have, integrated, or you have been able to, have ISO 27001, as part of the standards you have subscribed to, so it will help you to reduce the complexity, because everything is just, built on ISO 27001. It's an from clause 4 to clause 10, which are the requirements of ISO 27001. So the moment you abide and comply with those clauses, it will help you to reduce the complexities in implementing ISO 27001. Also, it builds trust in managing personal data or personal information, to build trust, because these are best practices. These are international best practices. So it gives the trust, yes, that I'm applying best practices. I'm applying best practices. Also, it supports compliance with privacy regulation, yes, because most of these privacy regulation, GDPR and NDPR, they were built from ISO 27001. Most of the provisions of those regulations came from ISO 27001. Also third-party assurance for privacy regulation compliance. So it gives an assurance to third party, because when you have a data controller or data processor and you have subscribed to this standard, though ISO 27001 is not organizations don't comply. It's not something that the organization should comply, or you are certified to know. Is for individuals. So, for you as an individual, you can write it and get certified. The organization, the moment you have your ISO 27001, it's assumed also that you have ISO 27701, because it's an extension of that. Any question on that? Hello? No question or no? Okay, let's go. All right, the terms in privacy management. So that's what I was saying. Most of these things, best practices and regulations, what are the difference? Best practice is not the same thing as regulation. Best practice is something else. These are the good, practices. Let's argue this. These are the good practices, things, yes, we feel that, yes, this is the way to go. The regulations are compulsory. These are compulsory, standard things that we must do. It's law. It's based on regulations and based on law. The best practice, you have options. Like ISO standards are best practices. It's not a regulation. So nobody except here in Nigeria, where CBN did what we call the CBN IT standard blueprint. They brought it into the standard blueprint to help organization. In Nigeria, banking is the most regulated, sector in the world. Nigerian bank is the most regulated. So CBN brought that, as part of their regulation. But in the truth, ISO standards are not regulation. They are best practices. So you can decide to comply. You can decide, to get, certified to that or not. So ISO standard, yeah, it says best practices you chose to implement or not. But NDPR, GDPR, Cyber Act, Data Protection Act or laws, they are all regulations or law. So ISO requirements plus guidelines. I've said in ISO 27001, we have what we call the requirements. And the requirement is from clause 4 to clause 10, which means what it means that it is compulsory. If you are getting certified to ISO 27001 and those clauses from clause 4 to clause 10, you have not, or you are not complying to that, you get non-conformity. In fact, they will not be issued the certificate because they are compulsory, requirements. So that's what's the requirement. So why guidelines are things that, I'm just proposing to you, you may or you may not. That's guidelines. But for requirement, it is compulsory. So a requirement is part of the audit. One guideline is a suggestion, advice, to implement. We have described about data protection and privacy, the difference between two of them, and also the difference between data protection and information security. We say that information security is their father, is the father of all. Why every time, those who are in cyber security, that the threat actor is interested in what? Data. That is what it's interested in. And that's why when you are looking from cybersecurity, perspective, that's what we call defense index. If you want to protect your data, you have to build defense. You have to build, layers of defense in order, because the threat actor is interested in what? In data. That's the only thing. So that's why information security houses both the privacy and data protection. They are all embedded in information security. I'm saying if personal identifiable information is the same thing as personal data, while we have also regional and international water. So these are the things. So the structure of ISO 27001, privacy. So one is clause 1 is the scope, clause 2 is the normative reference. We have clause 3 terms, definition and abbreviations, while clause 4 is the general. So it's from clause 5 that we now have the extension of ISO 27001. So clause 5, brings all the clauses in ISO 27001 from clause 4 to clause 10. While clause 6 is what the controls, those 114 controls that are found in ISO 27001 is clause 6 of this of privacy, information management system. While clause 7 of it is annexure, which talks about the controls for the controllers, and why clause 8 also is the controls for what? The processor. So basically, when you look at clause 5 and clause 6 is the most important part of the structure of ISO 27001. So who can use ISO 27001? So when you look at, I said that it's meant for every organization, irrespective of your type, your size, or your nature. So anybody, so the standard, guys, organizations who are responsible for data, processing within an information security management system. So it is meant for any organization, irrespective of the type, the size, or the nature of that organization. So it's whether it's public or private companies, whether it's government entities, if you look at in Nigeria today, Nigeria Data Protection, Commission is taking it seriously when it comes to compliance of data protection. In fact, from what the DG was saying, he said any data breach, anybody or any organization, the person that is responsible for that breach will get a 3 years imprisonment. So it's a serious issue right now. So it's meant for any organization, whether you are in public or private sector. You can't say because you're in private or public sector, you are not, required. So it is meant for any entity, whether government, whether private, whether public or non-profit. So that's why the issue of data, from where we have said, is a very sensitive thing. In Nigeria, we have spoken that the 3 jurisdictions Nigeria is playing in those 3 divisions. So whether it is from Europe perspective, whether it's from American perspective or from China perspective, we are all playing in those 3, jurisdictions. So the normative preference, these are some of the build-ups, so of our normative success, these other standards that relates to ISO 27001. And one of them was spoken about, ISO 2700, which is the main, clause, the main, ISO for ISO 27001, which is Information Security Management System, the overview and vocabulary. They will have the 27001 2013, which is Information Security Management System. Then we know that we have migrated from 2013 to 2022, of ISO 27001. But because the PMIs have not been changed, they are still using 2013 because the controls. So, but I know that the framework of privacy, which is ISO 29100, has been also, the version has been changed. So we have 2024. So with that now, I believe by next year, ISO 27001 will not be compliant to 27001 2022 because the framework has been changed to 2024. That's okay, yes, ISO 29100 privacy framework. So we have the latest version now in 2024 version of privacy framework. Okay, the key terms and alternative terms. So most of these terms we have seen them, privacy information management system, personal identifiable information, which is personal data, personal identifiable information principle, which is the data subject. So here you see personal identifiable information principle. You can also see privacy by design, which is also the same thing as data protection by design, or privacy by default, or data protection by default. Then we have PPI controller, which is also data controller, or the controller. We have the data processor, which is PII processor, also the same. These are some of the terms, and with time we get to know most of those things. So the ISO 27000, most of these definitions I said came from the framework, which is ISO 29100. And these are some of the meanings of what we have said. The personal identifiable information, we are talking about identifiable information of the data subjects, specifically the identifiable person. We are talking about the PII principle, which is the natural person to whom the personally identifiable information relates. So, which is also data subject. So that person you are collecting data is called the private information, identifiable information principle. Why the data controller or the privacy information, is the stakeholder, the person that determines the purpose, or the means of processing of PII, that person that determines. So in organization, you can be a data controller and also be a data processor, because most organizations, they collect data and they also process data. Like most of these telecoms, banks, they collect data. So as a data, the person that collects data, or the person that decides what the purpose and the means of processing of that data is called the data controller or the PII controller, which is, personal identifiable information controller. The same thing as the processor, who is the person that processes those data on behalf of the controller, is called the PII processor. So you can be two of them. We also have what we call the joint, controller and joint processors. So these are some of the, nomenclatures you will see in PMS. Then we have what we call the privacy impact assessment. In ISO 2, we also have it as data impact assessment. So we can interchange that, either privacy or data. And we have explained the difference between privacy and data. So this is the overall process of identifying, analyzing, evaluating, consulting, and communicating, and planning the treatment of potential privacy impacts. If I use your number, your phone number, what is the impact? That's what that data, privacy impact assessment, trying to do assessment of those personal information, those identifiable information, to do an assessment, the impact, the consequence of using them, the impact of using them. Like phone number, before, all of us, we thought that BVN, but until I did a data impact, I will show you, one of the works I have done, in privacy. When we get to that, you see the sample. You will not know that your phone number is critical. You must keep your phone very, very, very safe. Because with your phone, I can get your BVN. But with BVN, you might not be able to get my phone. So these are the things. So the impact, what is the impact of, personal data? What is the impact? So that's what, impact, privacy impact assessment is speaking about. Then now have what we call the privacy risk assessment. So after doing your data or your privacy impact assessment, then you now do the risk assessment to now know the kind of risk, the level of risk, what are the risk treatment options you have in order to mitigate the risk. And we do or we conduct data impact or privacy impact the moment, anytime we have either a new, processing activity, or we have a new product we want, to bring into the market. You have to test what is the impact of all the personal identifiable information I have collected or I'm going to collect from my customers. So you need to test that impact. And that's where issue of privacy by design comes. So as you are designing your product, as you are designing your activities, you are embedding what? Privacy into your activities. It's not when you have finished product development, or you have gone to change management, then you now begin to talk about issue of privacy or data protection. So data protection should be by default. It should be by design. By design means that from day one, as I want to begin to design a product, I'm bringing issue of data protection and privacy into my design. And as a default, it has to become a business as usual. It becomes part of my way of life. It becomes my culture. And that's what we call privacy culture. It becomes privacy culture that as I'm going, it's part of my life. It's part of my way of life. As I come into the organization, as I'm going on the road, I'm thinking about what? Data protection, privacy. As I'm carrying my laptop, my mind is getting into what? Data protection, privacy. That's by design. It's part of, the level when you're talking about your maturity level. And you know that this is continual improvement. The maturity level is for us to get to what? To privacy what? By design. So the next one is privacy risk. And we have said, what risk is. Risk is the effect of uncertainty, on any objective. It's the effect of uncertainty on any objective. So here, at the privacy risk, there's the effect of uncertainty on privacy. So this is the clause 5. I suppose that clause 5 and clause 6 is just an extension of ISO 27001. So when you look at here, you see how they are married, from clause 5. Clause 5.2 is clause 4 in ISO 27001. While 5.3 is clause 5, leadership. 5.4 is clause 6, planning. 5.5 is 7, it is support. And 5.6 is suppression, which is clause 8. While 5.7 is performance evaluation, which is clause 9 in ISO 27001, and 5.8 is clause 10 in ISO 27001. So when you look at all these things, most of them, there's no additional requirement. It's all the same, only about 2 that you have additional requirement. That's the context of the organization. And why we have that additional requirement, the context, we're talking about the context of the organization, which is looking at what the organization is about. And here, the only thing we are talking about is what? Personal data. So we are not referring to any other thing. So that's why the additional information is coming to that clause 5.2 and clause 5.4 planning. Yeah. So when we get to, to the demi cycle, we look at it. Okay, that's the name. So the demi cycle, what we call PDCA. We call it the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, and act towards cycle. So I'm trying to look at it, relate it, to what we are talking about here, ISO 270 and ISO 7001. From that perspective. So when you look at the diagram here, you see that I did something, showing where, when we talk about the plan, in this Deming cycle, what constitutes a plan. So from the context of the organization, leadership, planning, and support, that's what makes up what the plan. So these are the high level. We're talking about planning, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about the context, understanding the business of the organization, understanding the context of the organization, understanding the external and the internal, factors, that affects the organization, understanding, the scope of the organization. That's the context. Then leadership. What kind of leadership? What is the top management support? What is the top management leadership, provision, as regards to what privacy? Then we're talking about the planning aspect. When we do our planning, so what and what, looking at the risk management, risk assessment, aspect, the planning stage of a risk assessment, then the support, looking at the issue of competence, looking at the issue of documented information. In ISO standards, one of the critical things is what? Documented information. Everything you do must be documented. So these are the support. Then when you now come to the doing aspect, that is the execution. Doing, when you do something. So that's the operation. So it's in operation that the execution is carried out. Where you have, after your planning and all those things and the resources have been provided, then you begin to do what? Execute. So that's the doing. So you execute your action, look at your records, plan the outcomes, looking at what are you going to do, what is the outcome of what you are doing. That is the operational aspect of it. Thereafter, then you are talking about the performance evaluation, which is the check. And that's where we have issue of monitoring, evaluation, and all those things. Then internal audit, because it's part of check. Internal audit is not checking all the things operation has done, whether they are in accordance with the standard, So that's the checking. So this plan, do, check, and act. Why act? We are talking about what? Act. At that time, after to do what? Execute or act all the things you have done. And that is the issue of what? Continual improvement. You want to begin to have continual improvement, oversight, of all the things you have done, from the context of organization to the performance level. So, and that's where the issue of you are looking at your CAPA, corrective actions and preventive actions. What do I do? What are those things the audit has recommended? How are we implementing it? How are we acting them? How are we ensuring that those things are being remediated? So basically, this is what we call the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, and act cycle. So the additional controls, in ISO 270, we have talked about this, understanding the organization and its context. So you say here, determine the organization role as a controller or as a processor. Determine external and internal factors that may affect the ability to achieve the intended outcomes of the PNL. So, which is 4.1 in ISO 27001. We say it's an extension. The same thing, 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of what? Interested parties. So include, any of those parties having interest or responsibility towards processing personal what? Data. So, of the interested parties. So you need to include them as part of the understanding their expectation. What is the expectation? Like in Nigeria here, we can talk about the inland revenue. These are interested parties. These are parties that they collect personal identifiable information. HMOs, these are interested parties. Hospitals, these are interested parties. So you need to begin to look at their interest or responsibility towards processing of personal data, among these interested parties. Then you determine the scope, what are the scope? I've told you that the scope of private, privacy information management system is only the personal data. We don't have any other thing, unlike in ISO 27001, where you can extend the scope, to technology, you can extend the scope to processes, and in privacy, the scope is only personal data. That is the scope, and that's what we are dealing with. the personal data, identifying those personal data, how do we ensure the privacy of those personal data? So that's the scope. Then we talk about 4.4, which is information security management system. How do we establish, implement, and maintain a continuous improvement of privacy information management system? Then the 6.12, which is, the information, I talked about planning, that's where you get your risk assessment, in planning, which is clause 6. So say here, apply the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of, of risk assessment process to identify risks related to the processing of personal data. So when we get to those areas, we are going to get, deep into such, related issues. So let's go. Okay, so this is the control. This clause 6. The clause 6 is talking about the controls. This is ISO 27002. So it's trying to match the two. We're talking about information security policy. The clause 5, talking about clause 6, organization of information security, human resources. So basically, it's looking at all those controls in ISO 27002. Which are the same. So this is the explanation of some of those controls, information security policy, roles and responsibility, mobile device policy, information security awareness, and education and training. So these are all the necessary controls. Asset management, access control, cryptography is part of it, also part of the controls. Cryptography meaning that yes, coding, trying to ensure that yes, the information is meant for the right person. Not everybody, third party don't have access. So we are using, cryptographic, process to ensure that data is protected and secure. And all of them, physical security, communication security, system acquisition and development. These are all the controls in that, ISO 27002. The last was, clause 18, that's A18, which is compliance. So clause 7, we were talking about the controllers, the clauses is talking about controls for the controllers. Here you identify and document, process, the purpose of processing. When we talk about the legal basis of processing, so you need to also document the purpose. Why are you collecting this data? And the purpose will be specific. You don't collect data for when you collect somebody's data, you can use it for anything. No, it must be what? What is the purpose? It must be specific. You must ensure that yes, the data you collected is meant for what? For a specific what? Issue. It's not that when you collect data, you can use it for anything. It's against, the ISO 27001 and even NDPI. Then you identify the lawful basis for processing personal data, which we have done. Then obtain and record the consent, provide a mechanism to modify or withdraw what? Your consent. So in your privacy notice, all these things, these bases, all these controls have to be in your privacy what? Notice. You're going to tell the data, subjects that yes, you have, the right to do what? Modify. You have the right to modify or withdraw your consent. You have the right, to modify, or port portability. All those things are the right of what? The data subject or the PII, principle. Then provide privacy notice to individual. I gave you an example of the CCTV. You must provide privacy what? Notice. You cannot put your CCTV without a privacy notice. It is against what? The standard. You must provide what? The notice. Then you conduct privacy impact assessment, have contracts with processors, maintain records related to the processing of PII, limit collections and processing of what? Personal data. So you have to limit it. You don't collect and use it for any other everything. Maintain accuracy. There must be accuracy. So anything you collect is what you don't alter it. There must be integrity of what? Data. And that's where the issue of CIA comes in. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those data must be available at any time. That's where the issue of availability also comes. Then ensure personal data de-identification and deletion at the end of what? Processing. So at the end of processing, when those data are no longer in use, you must have a process of what? De-identification and what? Deletion. You must delete the data. You don't keep those data for further use when no longer in use. Same thing. So you provide mechanism to access or correct or erase. Yes. Have process to handle individuals' requests, complaints, maintain procedures of retention and disposal of what personal data. So you must have your retention policy, identify the basis for PII transfer between jurisdictions in Nigeria before you transfer any personal identifiable information, to certain jurisdiction. The Attorney General of the Federation must give an approval. So you must look at the basis for transfer. You must understand the basis of transfer of personal identifiable information to different jurisdictions outside Nigeria. Identify countries and international organizations to which personal data can be transferred. So in NDPI, they have listed countries where we can do what transfer, data. And there are some countries which are like pariah countries, which you must get approval before you transfer data to such jurisdiction. Then maintain record of transfer, maintain record of your personal identifiable information disclosure to third parties. If you disclose to third parties, you must maintain that record. And there must be a consent before you can disclose to third parties. Then for the NSP, which is for processors, the other one is for controllers, ensure that the contract to processing personal data addresses the organization's role in providing assistance with the client's organization's obligation. Ensure that the personal data processed on behalf of the customer are as documented instructions. So, I've spoken about, clause 7, ISO 270, which is where the documented information, everything you did has to be what? Documented. There must be documented information. Inform the client organization if processing instruction infringes applicable legislation. Because most times, you are a processor and the controller gives you the job or the contract to process. It is your responsibility when you find out that the processing instruction infringes applicable legislation. You must tell the controller, or else it becomes an issue. Provide the client organization with the appropriate information to demonstrate compliance with their obligation. Then provide the customer with the means to comply with its obligation related to individual rights. So these are the work, or these controls are for the processors. They should ensure. You don't say because you're a processor, you don't have the responsibility. You have the responsibility to protect the data subject, the privacy of the data subject. So it continues, so these things, let me not belabor the points, so that we can get it. So you can read it off. We are going to. So let's get to privacy risk management. All right, so how many minutes do I have? So that let me know how to manage the time.
Hello, sir.
The moderator, so how many minutes do I have? So that I know.
Yes, sir. You have 5 more minutes, sir.
5 more minutes. That's gonna, you have to give us at least 15 minutes less. Are we
to finish up?
Yeah, to finish. The participants, what do you say? Because we need to, I'm trying to rush. Are we okay? Let's go on. Let's go. Let's see how we go.
Yeah. Okay, so we can make
Yeah,
it 10
we can work with
minutes, sir.
10 minutes.
Hello. Yeah. Because I feel that, yes, these things I'm rushing, but it's very important. Where we are going now is very critical. These are the areas we need to look at. So we're talking about risk, and we have defined risk as anything that has a set of uncertainty and objective, and the risk is the likelihood of threat exploiting a vulnerability. So these are some of the concepts we're going to hear here. We are going to hear about threat, vulnerability, likelihood, consequence, that impact. So these are the things that make up. So it said in ISO 27001, risk management is a systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the activities of communicating. So from here, communicating, consulting, establishing the context, and identifying, analyzing, evaluating, treating, monitoring, and reviewing risk. So that's the management of risk. Establishing the context. You have to establish the context, identify, analyze risk, evaluate risk, treat risk, monitor risk, and also do review. So from the definition, these are the things we have extracted: establishing the context, risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, treatment, communication, and monitoring. So this is the privacy risk management model. So from here, establishment of the context, we talk about identification, analysis, evaluation, this is the model. So in context, we have here, the context we have from, the ISO, 27001, which is clause 5, point 2, we are talking about the context of the organization, establishing the context, also define the scope and the boundaries. And here we said that the scope of privacy is personal data, that's the scope. establishing an appropriate governance structure. How do we govern your data? The governance structure, meeting legal and regulatory requirements, practicing corporate responsibility. You must practice corporate responsibility. You must ensure that the fundamental human rights of your data subjects are maintained, enhancing consumer trust. Because when you protect the data of your customers, of your data subjects, you are enhancing what? Trust, consumer trust. They will trust in your product. They will trust in your organization. They will respect your organization. They will come back to do business. Perception and expectations of internal and external parties. We have spoken about that, the internal and external parties, looking at the expectations, stakeholders, regarding privacy. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people, regulators, people, data protect, protection organizations, and all those things are stakeholders. Then the culture of privacy. I said it earlier on, the culture. When I was talking about privacy by design, we need to begin to have a culture of privacy in everything we're doing in our organization. We must ensure that, yes, the data of the personal data of our customers are secure. That privacy should be assured. Then the other one is risk identification. So, so we look at what? After that, now, how do we identify the risk? The risk in personal data. How do we identify? So effectively protecting personal information requires identification of potential privacy risks so that they may be eliminated or at least be reduced or mitigated. So some of the steps is what? Identification of what? The asset. First of all, you have to identify in risk identification is the asset. Because we say that asset is anything that has what? Value. And we say that personal data is an asset. And because it has what? Value. You identify the threats, identify the vulnerabilities, then the existing controls and the impact also. So I say regardless of the size, structure, or nature of an organization, mismanagement of personal information unavoidably gives what? Rise to what? Risk. So the moment you are managing personal information of the data subject, risk will emanate. So how do you treat those risks? So so that's how to identify risk. The moment I'm using personal data of a data subject or your PII principal, know it that risk will do what? Arise. So asset identification, so that's one of the things in risk, assessment. You identify your assets. So most times we have different types of assets. The asset is anything that has value and requires protection. We have two broad, types of assets. One, the primary asset and the supporting asset. So in privacy, we have, business process and information. And also in 27001, the business process, and information. We call it information asset. So that's why it's an asset. There is value. In your processing, there is value. There is value. So that's why they are called assets. Then we have supporting assets like hardware, software, network, personnel, site, and organizational structure. So you look at those supporting assets. So it's in privacy. We only care to protect personal data, and that's the only asset in privacy. So the goal of risk management is to do or protect the primary asset. But it is the supporting asset on which the primary asset or the primary elements of the scope rely. So you cannot, say, okay, primary asset. How will I, protect primary assets when they run on the supporting asset? So it is very important that by protecting the supporting asset, you are also protecting the primary asset. Protection comes in. So identification of threat and vulnerability. So, we have said that threat is anything, that tries to exploit vulnerability. Anything that tries to exploit vulnerability. Why vulnerability is the weakness in information asset. Any weakness in information asset is called vulnerability. So when there is an asset or information asset and there's a weakness, it is called vulnerability. So when you observe, so say risk is observed as the marriage between threat and what? Vulnerability. So threat plus vulnerability will give you risk. So these are some of the examples of threats and vulnerability: compromising of confidential information, concealing user identity, damage caused by a third party, destruction of records, disaster, other things. So some of them, these are some of the threats. Why we have vulnerability: default password not changed, disposal of storage media without deleting data, inadequate change management, inadequate classification of information, inadequate control. So there are several examples of vulnerability. Then identification of existing control. So when you look at your asset, every asset has an inbuilt control. The moment you buy an asset, there is, asset, and that's why we call that inherent risk. When you look at inherent is a risk that control has not been applied. But in those assets that you want to do, risk assessment, there are some controls, but the only thing that those controls cannot, reduce the risk substantially to your risk appetite. So that's what we call existing control. So control is anything that can do what? Modify risk. Anything that can modify risk is called control. So assets come with embedded controls, just like I explained. So it comes with embedded controls. The only thing that those controls are not enough to be shared or to reduce, the risk level. So that's why we need to apply more control. So as I say, at times, such existing controls are not sufficient to bring the level of risk to what is acceptable according to the organization's risk acceptance criteria or your risk appetite. So identification of existing controls helps in avoiding duplication and unnecessary work costs. So you need to identify the existing control so that you don't go and apply the same control. Control is directly proportional to what? To investment or cost. You have to make control. You have to buy those controls. So you must identify. That's the issue. That's why it is necessary to identify the existing control. Then you document all the existing controls for your risk treatment procedure. So then you look at your consequence and what and your likelihood. That consequence means impact. What is the impact of these risks, or on the asset? What is the impact? So the consequence and what? And the likelihood. Likelihood means what is the probability that this risk will crystallize on us. So when you have those things, you begin to now know. That's when you can now know what the risks are and now begin to look at your risk treatment options. So this is the risk analysis. I call this the risk map. It's a 5x5, risk, map, talking about likelihood and impact. So when you multiply your likelihood by impact, it will give you your risk. So here, depending on our likelihood, rare and other things. So those that are about 25 to 50, these are our what? Catastrophic or very high risk. We have high, moderate, and minor and insignificant. So this is the definition of our likelihood ratings. When it is rare, maybe it's more than 10 years. So when it is unlikely, it's 4 years or less than, less than 10 years. So possible. So I'll say the purpose of risk analysis is to assign levels to risk. That's the essence. To assign levels. I want to look at the level of risk I'm carrying. So risk level can be calculated as follows. You say, that data privacy risk levels, likelihood times what? Severity, which is impact. Likelihood times what? Impact. So risk analysis methodology can be qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative or quantitative. So most times in risk methodology, there are different ways. Either you use qualitative or quantitative. So you may have a scenario of a combination of qualitative and quantitative. We call it semi-quantitative. Then asset valuation is, I'm trying to build up, when you do your risk assessment. So asset valuation, looking at the CIA. So we choose the highest. So risk evaluation and treatment. So the output from risk analysis, that's what we've done here, is used as the input to your risk evaluation. So the levels of all risk are to be compared against risk evaluation criteria, because risk evaluation is, the standard you have set, so this is where we want to operate, and, and the acceptance criteria, this is our acceptable level. This is what we can accept, So from here and this definition, most times when it is low, yes, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to treat it again. But when it is medium, under control, but it means close monitoring, I can say, okay, depending on what my risk appetite is. Some organizations, their risk appetite is medium, which means when your risk falls within that, level, you can say, okay, let us move along. Or you can do a further treatment if you have the money to bring more controls. And when it is high, which is high potential for significant losses, breaches, risk appetite. So in such cases, what do? Either you reduce risk, your priority action or transfer or avoid activity. By avoiding risk, you have done something. I don't want to play here. Or you can obtain your board approval, depending, because it's the highest level that can say, okay, we can, go with this risk. So these are the risk treatment options. Either you accept risk when it is low, you can accept or reduce risk when it is medium. Then when it is high, you can reduce, transfer, share, or reject the risk. So these are the risks, assessment methodologies. We're talking about the kind of methodology. So risk assessment helps to set these priorities. They evaluate the potential impact and probability of each risk. So some of the methodologies quantitative, qualitative, semi-quantitative, asset-based, vulnerability-based, or threat-based. So you can use any of those. Most times, the one that is available to us most times might be an asset-based, risk assessment. So the one I'm having here is an asset-based risk assessment. Asset-based risk assessment. So when you look at here, first of all, you identify your asset. So in risk assessment, the first thing you do is what? Risk asset identification. When you identify your asset, what type of asset is it? Like here I said, my DPIA, which is data protection impact assessment, is that asset. So it's a software, so what are the applicable threats, or the impact of the threat? What are the threat source? This security system, security breach. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the vulnerabilities? So you, just like from what we did, examples of vulnerability. So you check the vulnerability that will act on this. What is it? So I say here, poor asset configuration. So if I don't configure this with access to this DPIS, it's a vulnerability. So I have opened up, it is a weakness. Then what are the existing controls? User access management, antivirus, patching of systems, EDR, SOC, and all those stuff. So that's the existing control. So likelihood, what is the likelihood that this risk will crystallize? I say here it is 2. Then what is the impact? We say you take the asset, the impact from the highest of CIA, confidentiality, integrity, or availability. So the highest of it. So here there are 2. So I take what? 2. So when you multiply likelihood times impact, what will give you your what? Your risk value. That is what ROV means, your risk value. So because from our risk map, if you check that risk map, you see that 4 from here, 4 is green, which is low. Understand? That risk is what? Low. It is low. So the same thing. So you do the same thing, or you can change. So this is what we call, this one is semi-quantitative system, because I'm using figures. I'm also using some qualitative, methodology, because in my threat and vulnerability, they are more qualitative. So while I'm using in my TIA, I'm using figures. Those figures are also at times qualitative because there's no empirical way. It's just by my intuition. Okay, this is where it's supposed to be, or this is the likelihood. This is the, so that's what our risk assessment procedure is. I hope that has given us some insight on how to do risk assessment. So when you now do this, if it is a high, like if this low now is high, so what I need to do was, so there is further treatment. So I have to do a further treatment. And by further treatment is by applying additional control. So when I apply additional control in order to reduce my risk level, so that control should be able to now reduce the risk to either to my risk appetite or to a very low level. So that is what that now gives you your final option, which is what your risk, you are carrying. But when you have applied controls and the risk has not also come down to the risk level or your risk appetite, at that point, that risk you have to escalate it to your the board. So because it is only the board that has the right to either to accept or reject risk. So you do your risk treatment, result. So you provide such result to your top management. Okay, this is the data privacy impact assessment. This thing is a proprietary work. I just want to use this for demonstration. It's a proprietary work. So, but when you look at it, so their impact, we're thinking about data impact. All the phone number, these are personal details. We have financial details, your bank account, your insurance, tax reference, pension details, debit cards, and all those things. So these are the things. So when you look at to who can I collect this from? Like from this name, staff, I can collect staff, potential staff, clients, customers, visitors, I collect their names. When your visitor comes to your environment, either you use register visitors register or use access control by logical access control. You are collecting their names. So why am I collecting that? For staff administration, for client administration, consultant administration, suppliers, or this. That is why I'm collecting those. So you must take the reason why I'm collecting it. Where am I collecting it? Where is it? So for manual, or printed, is it the method you are using? Is it local or digital records? Are you using biometrics? Are you using logical access control? Then when? So when you collect all this information, like for staff, during appraisal, HMO registration, pre-appointment, some at times law enforcement agencies can ask for those things. So that's when I collect them. So how do I collect it? Direct from the data subject. So I can collect from the staff directly. That's direct from the data subject. It can be via marketing activities. We are talking about legitimate interest here. So it can be via marketing activities. It can be through third parties. My processor. It can be through third parties. I gave you example with Tesla. That Tesla opened an insurance company and they give the data of all their data subject to the insurance company. The only thing that the Elon Musk is using now is monetizing, those data, so that you will now say you didn't get consent. So you're just monetizing. You are selling your data and collecting money and giving your data to third parties. So that's what he's trying to do. So who are those? What assets? So where do I get those things? From staff, and management data subject and assessment. So thereafter, that is what we call data impact assessment. I'm doing the impact. So when I start doing that impact, I cannot do the risk assessment. So from here, I'm looking at, okay, let us go to telephone number. You see that it's red there. So what is the impact or the likelihood that if my phone is missing today, to mitigate that risk, and the mitigation is by applying control. So when I apply controls, to it, I can say access control, information security policies. There's something we call, from NIPS have developed now what we call anti-swap, solution. So which is part of the controls. NIPS have to come up with that solution. We call it anti-swap, SIM swap solution. So what it means that instead of anybody to use a SIM that has been swapped before to open an account or to do any financial transaction, that solution will abruptly, escalate it and say, this SIM has been used, in the past. So don't use it to open an account except you know the owner of that. So so when you do that, so my risk reduced to what? To 9. And 9 means that it is what? Medium. So which means because of the control I've applied, the risk that was 25 now has been reduced to 9. So from data impact assessment, I've gone to risk assessment to ensure that yes, controls have been put in place in order to mitigate the risk against my data privacy. So basically, so the risk management, basis, talking about risk minus control, is equal to exposure, so acceptance or action. So this is what we have explained. So these are the risk mitigation strategies and controls. We have analyzed all this. Either you accept risk, either you avoid risk, either you transfer risk, or you can share risk. By sharing risk, when you do, syndication, like in banking, when you do syndication of loans. So instead of one person to bear the risk, you share it with other banks. The same thing in insurance. Insurance, they can share risk. Instead of doing one person carrying the risk, they can share the risk, depending on the percentage. We also have, buffering, so in here, talking about, the backups, your buffer. What kind of buffer do you have? If there's an incident, if the risk crystallizes, what can I do? Can I revert? What is my business continuity plan? So that's what buffering is. Then you can strategize, risk strategizing. So you try to create option B, plan B, in case there is anything. That's strategy, contingency plan. That's part of risk mitigation work. Methodologies and strategies. Then you can test, verify, perform that, testing before. Then quantification. I can quantify my risk. If I know the value of my risk, I can know whether I can apply control. If my control is, the cost of control is higher than risk, I don't need to do anything. Are we together? Do you understand what I'm saying? If the cost of control is higher than your risk, you should not do anything. You can't, because the risk you are mitigating should be higher than the control you apply. The risk you are mitigating should have to be higher than the control you apply. So whenever the cost of control is higher than your risk, you should not do anything. You should leave it here. So that's quantification. Then risk reduction, risk digitization. You can digitalize to recognize your risk, and that is what we call empirical quantitative. Then you can diversify your risk. You can spread out the potential risk across various projects. Instead of one project or investment bearing those risks, you can diversify all your risks in order not to, in order to ensure that the risks, impact is reduced. So risk communication, and consultation. So we can also know how to communicate risk. So risk communication is necessary in decision making among stakeholders. You must communicate risk. I told you in risk assessment, when you have done your risk assessment and the risk level has not reduced, you have to communicate that risk to top management, because it's top management that will take decision, that the decision making bodies. So you must communicate that risk to top management. So effective communication among stakeholders will ensure that those responsible for implementing risk management understand the basis on which decisions are made and why particular actions are required. So effective communication of risk will help stakeholders, so that they will know how to implement those risk mitigants. Then communication and approval of the outcome of the residual risk, above the organizational risk appetite and the risk assessment and treatment plan to top management, which is what I've explained. So your residual risk, which is above your risk appetite, has to be communicated to the top management, which is the board, because they are the one that we use for decision making and also whether we should accept that risk or not. So in privacy, organizations are obliged to inform data subjects about risk involved in the transfer of their personal data abroad. So you must advise your data subjects or your personal identifiable principals risk involved in transferring their data abroad. So risk monitoring and review. So risks are not static. You said that they are not static. Risk is always dynamic. Risk today might be a potential opportunity, the next time. So threats, vulnerability, likelihood, or impact may change suddenly and without indication. So constant monitoring is necessary to detect these changes. So there must be constant monitoring and review of your risk. Review of all risk factors to identify any changes, earlier enough. And these are continuous improvement, in data privacy. So data privacy is not, I say it's not a one-time project, but a continuous process. It's a continuous improvement that requires constant monitoring, evaluation, and improvement. As the data landscape evolves, so do the risks and opportunities for data protection and utilization. Therefore, it is essential for organizations to adopt a culture of continuous improvement, in their data privacy decision. That's what we talk about, privacy by design, culture of privacy. Some continuous improvement processes and strategies are listed below. Conduct regular, data audits, and that's why in Nigeria it is compulsory that if you are a data controller that collects more than 2,000, personal identifiable information of data subject, you are subjected to what? To audit every year by the DPCO. Implement corrective actions, measure and evaluate progress and impact, adopt a privacy by design approach. I have emphasized on that severally. And adopt a privacy by what? Design approach. That will help for continuous improvement. Then educating employees and raising awareness. There must be awareness. In fact, for you to pass, NDPR audit, one of the requirements is that what is the awareness, the training you have given to what? To even the customers, to the data subject, and to your employees. Implement robust security measures. Continuous improvement in data privacy communication, continuous improvement of data privacy culture, continuous improvement in then driving innovation and continuous improvement with data insight, then continuous improvement of data privacy strategy. So these are continuous improvement strategies and processes in data privacy. So if you implement all these things, there is no way, because we are talking about controls, there is no way you will have data breach in your environment. There's no way. So if these are the things we need to adopt, it's not theory, these are things we need to do. Privacy by design, privacy by default. We need to begin to implement all these things. Thank you. And questions.
Thank you very much. Hello, sir.
Yeah,
Hello,
I'm here.
everyone. Yeah. Thank you very, very, very much, Pat, for this information-packed, knowledge-packed session. We are very, very grateful for your time and for sharing your depth of knowledge with us. So because our time is fast spent, we'll just be taking questions for 5 minutes. And so if you have questions that you'd like to ask our guest for today, please drop it in the chat box. Oh, okay, we have quite a few. Oh, people are saying thank you, sir. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box. So while you were speaking, you know, I noted down the question. So you said risk assessment and privacy is everybody's business, which to a very large extent, I understand that. But then for a non-expert, how do you assess the risk around you? Like for a non-expert, since it's everybody's business, we do not have to wait. We do not have to wait. We do not have to wait until we are experts to be able to assess risk. So how do we go about it?
Okay, thank you. If you hear me well, I have been emphasizing on the culture of privacy, of privacy. And that is so when it's culture, it's a way of life. You don't need to be an expert. It's part of our way of life. We know that, yes, when I was discussing about the types of privacy, I said that for everybody, there is something to hide. And that is our human dignity. Nobody wants to, be, say that you are, exposed or something like that. So you must be able to protect your dignity, your privacy. Everybody wants. So you don't need to be taught how to protect your privacy. So that's why it's a culture. We need to begin to understand that, yes, as we on a daily basis, we are going about our business, whether you're on the road or like at times some people in a public bus, you see them with their phone, speaking, talking, releasing secrets. Like some, senior people here that have drivers. Oh, you will be with your driver, you'll be talking, releasing information. So it's risk. That is it. So the risk assessment we're talking about is everybody. So you need to assess your environment, assess the risk you're carrying. That data, as you are speaking, it is data. It's a privacy. You are releasing data. You are releasing information. You don't know how that information will travel. So that's why it is a culture of privacy. We must begin to abide and embed the culture of what? Privacy and everything. So that's the only way you begin to do what? Your risk assessment. Assess what you are, releasing. Accept what you are carrying. Understand that yes, privacy is vital in everything I'm doing. You are carrying your laptop home. How do I protect my laptop? Especially those who are in Lagos, where you know that at times when you're on traffic, you see those boys coming. Knowing fully when you are carrying vital information, these are assets. These are privacy. These are data that you are carrying. And those data may be critical data of the organization. So how do you must do that risk assessment as an individual? Should I carry that, laptop home and enter bus, or do I leave it in the office if I don't have any need? Okay, if I have any need for it, do I enter, what's it called, Uber or something like that to ensure that that is protected? So that's risk assessment. So it's part of our life. It's a way of life. We must begin to, interrogate and begin to embed that culture of privacy. And when we do that, you should be able to analyze your risk. Everybody has risk to carry, but you must look at your risk appetite. What can I be able to, carry along? Thank you.
Sir. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah. So somebody in the comments, Favor Agbulade, she says, if a customer asks to erase his data from our system and our retention period is like 10 years, what do we do?
It has the right. It's not the issue of now retention now. It's the issue of the right of the data subject. And one of the rights of the data subject is what? Is the right to erase data. Except you are still, if you are, the data subject, you have you have, disengaged from the processing activity. There was a reason why you collected that data. If you are still, if that, contract is still in place, maybe account has been opened and you're still running that account, we can't erase those data. Then when he has closed his account, he has the right to tell you to erase my data. You don't need to, it's not issue of your retention strategy or that one is, retention strategy is your personal, but he has the right for my data to be erased. So you must give him that right. Somebody is raising his hand. Adewale Adife.
Hello, Adewale. Kindly unmute and ask your question, please. Adewale, are you here? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you speak a bit?
I want to know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Kingsley,
Yeah,
for
I
a
can
wonderful
hear
section.
you,
I want to
Adewale.
ask about what I saw majorly were you mapping the PIMS, Priority Information Management System, to the 2013 version. So,
Yeah.
like, are there provisions for PIMS in the 2022 version of the ISMS, sorry, and how is the mapping like? Because you're saying clause 4 is mapped to, clause 5 of the PIMS,
Yeah.
5 is mapped to clause 4 and the like. So
5.2. The whole of clause 5 is from clause 4 to clause 10.
How does the mapping happen with 2020 version? That's
okay. In 2022, just like I said, if you listen to me, I said that the framework, privacy framework, which is ISO 29100, has been now, changed. So they have, that's a upgrade in 2024. That this 2024 is just being released. So it is that framework that will now help for it to be mapped to 2022. So as of today, it has not been mapped. That's why we are still using the ISO 27002-2013, which is 114 controls. The only difference here now is the control, which in 2022, the control is, I think, 97 or 90, yes, 97. While in the 2013, we have 114 controls. So with this release now, so I believe that, yes, the issue of, we now begin to map up, map the controls. So it's not a big thing. The main standard, which is the requirement, is the same. There's nothing that changed in the requirement, which is from clause 4 to clause 10. But for the controls, that's so with this framework that has been released, in 2024. So the mapping is just to map up in the controls. So it's not a big thing. You are also, you can do it. You can map it, the control. But I didn't want to go beyond. It's something I could have done. I don't want to go beyond the standard as of now. I don't want to run faster than the owners of the standard.
True. No problem. Thank you.
Hello, sir. There's
Yeah.
the last question here. We are taking the last question now in the box. It's from Michael Erino Shaw, and he says, with the sensitivity of data and the criticality attached to it, can you enlighten us on how some organizations designed their risk appetite and modernity?
Okay. Sensitivity and criticality of data. So how some risk appetite is a question of your ability to, what you think that, yes, is workable for you. I know that some organizations that are risk averse, understand, such organizations may put their risk appetite at low. Okay, what it means that no matter what, we must reduce this risk. We will not just take any risk anyhow. Understand? There are some organizations, they look at the law, they look at the regulations, they feel that, okay, if we do this thing, we have not even violated the law. So we might say our risk appetite is medium. So like this sensitive, and critical data, yes, they can tell you, okay, let me give you an instance in telecom. Telecoms, they deal with their main asset is phone lines. That's what they deal with. That's their main source of revenue. If you are using your phone line and for 3 months you have not used that phone line, the telecom will not wait for you. They will just sell that line. They will sell it to another person. They will sell that line. So they will not say because this is a sensitive data, this is a sensitive information. They will sell it. It's within their risk appetite. It's their legitimate interest. Understand? They will sell it off. And any consequence, you will bear it. I have seen people that lost money because of that. I've seen so many people. Somebody, just his phone, he has not used for 3 months. They sold it to another person, and that person onboarded on the mobile banking. Use that phone because the banker of the person, that had that phone number earlier was sending SMS to him, and he knew that this man has an account here. And you know that most mobile apps are agonistic. When I mean agonistic, that you can onboard mobile banking any device. It is not restricted to one device. No bank has restricted the mobile banking onboarding to one device. So you can onboard devices, onboard your mobile banking any device. And the man onboarded. So that's it. So the telecoms are not looking at sensitivity. So it depends on your risk appetite. It depends on what you want to do. So, and that's why the issue of risk appetite has to be interrogated very, very. That's why before organization we decide on their risk appetite. They have interrogated it, they have taken it to risk management, committee, strategy, have debated on it, because this is say, no matter what, even if we incur loss, we are ready to pay this loss. That is our appetite. So irrespective of the sensitivity or criticality of your data, and that's why we do the data impact assessment. That's why you have to conduct your data impact assessment to look at the impact of that personal data you have collected to your designs, to your products, to your to your processing activities. What is the impact? So is that impact that would define the criticality, and also look at what your risk appetite and your mitigation strategy will be. Because if those things are high, you can apply controls, in order to reduce the risk appetite. I hope I'm ready to answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. We have one more person raising up his hand, so we'll just allow him ask his questions before we call it a wrap. Mr. Femi, you can go ahead and ask your question. Kindly unmute and ask your question, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kingsley Duru. What a wonderful presentation and impacting knowledge, which I really appreciate. My question contribution goes this way. The first one is, we are looking at IEC 27701. So I want to ask, what is the relationship between this standard with ISO 27005 when we are dealing with the risk assessment for the organization? And also, if you look at the standard, if organization cannot subscribe to ISO 27701, and the organization can only subscribe to ISO 27001, and we are to set up impact analysis for the data using ISO 27001, what role does 27701 plays in between, so that we don't have a mix-up of the data analysis for our customer?
Okay, thank you. Okay, 27005 assessment is the risk, ISO, for ISO 27001, it's talking about the risk assessment, and the risk methodology. So the framework, that framework 27001, just like you explained, it will help you to do your risk assessment. That's the only thing it's part of ISO 27001. So when you are doing ISO 27001, that is why it is the principal ISO standard. It's part of the things you're gonna do in ISO 27001 is 27005. You can't be able to do from clause 6, which is planning, You have to talk about the issue of risk assessment, the issue of risk methodology. Then you now come to operation, which is clause 8. Also, that's where you now talk about. So when if you're implementing ISO 27001, one of the documents, that is necessary is ISO 27005, which is the risk assessment methodology. Then 27001 is like when you talk about ISO 31000, which is risk management. Organizations don't certify to risk management, but it is a necessary framework, that you should also certify. So as an individual in an organization, your organization can say, okay, because you are in risk management, go and get certified to ISO 31000. Understand? But not that the organization will go and not they give you a certificate for organization, say you are now certified to ISO 31000. The same thing with ISO 27701, which is Privacy Information Management System. As at today, yes, it's part of ISO 27001. The moment you have gotten ISO 27001, it is assumed that as an organization, you are fulfilling the intended outcomes of ISO 27001. I don't know whether I'm clear. Yeah, I'm deliberate with the English I use. The intended outcomes of ISO 27701. The moment you are certified to ISO 27001, it is assumed that you are certified to privacy. And that's why the issue of privacy is there. That's why when you go to ISO 27001 2022, there are so many fundamental new things that are coming into privacy is there, big data is there, SOC is there, security operation is there. But it is required for you as an individual or somebody that is implementing privacy for you to get certified, like as an individual, like me, Kingsley Duru. I have 27001, but my organization will not go and certify to what? 27001. What CBN, in their standard IT standard blueprint requires is that, okay, 27001, are you not certified? They will not ask, okay, how many of your staff have been certified to that? To show, okay, can you implement it? Understand? And so, but the provision of ISO 27001 is also part of the fulfillment of NDPR, because if you look at the slide, there are areas, we're talking about clause 8, which is annexure for controllers and for processors. Is telling us, but that clause 8 is talking about NDPR or GDPR. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about, method of processing, legal basis for processing, what you need to do. So that basis is looking at, what. So the moment you have certified to this, you are fulfilling in Europe, it seems, because GDPR is derived from this 27001. The same thing that our NDPR is also a copy of GDPR. So you are fulfilling it. So as an individual, you are required to get certified to 27701. But as an organization, it's not compulsory for that. It's not a compulsory. So the moment you have ISO 27001, it is deemed that you are fulfilling, because they are all part of ISO 27001. Just like we say 27005, they are all extension of ISO 27001. So the primary or the principal standard is ISO 27001. I don't know whether authority.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the extensive explanation. Okay, the other thing is my contribution with respect to the question of customer requesting for his data to be deleted from the company database. Actually, I believe is of two ways. There are some information that you can ask for deletion, but if the data is involved in statutory or regulatory requirements, for example, your data to a bank that is under maybe PDCIS's law, so you can request for deletion, but it can only be deleted after it has fulfilled the requirements of the statutory and regulatory body, so that people will not just go and send notification to the company and say, please delete my data right away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Kingsley, for your time. Please, if you have not filled the Google form, kindly do so, because we'll be giving the foundation level for ISO 27701, which is a paid course, but we'll be giving every participant of this webinar for free so that you can kickstart your journey into risk and privacy management. And before we go, I would like to introduce us. We are Standards and Best Practice. We are an accredited certification body. We provide training and certification for ISO standards and international best practices. If you'd like to learn more about us, kindly visit www.snbp.net to learn more about us, and follow us on all our social media platforms. We are available on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on Twitter. So until we see you next time again in our yet another webinar, thank you for coming. Have yourself a very nice week.
Standards and Best Practice, your partner in professional development.